It's Sunday, September 1st, 2023, and we are 64 days away from the election. Welcome to today's Make It Make Sense mini-episode. I'm Grant Herms. Today on the show, it is Trump against the U.S. Army. So, earlier this week, Donald Trump was invited to Arlington National Cemetery for a wreath-laying ceremony on the anniversary of the attack in Kabul, Afghanistan, as U.S. forces were withdrawing. Now, that attack killed 13 U.S. service members and more than 100 Afghan citizens, and Trump was invited by one of the families of those fallen service members. If you don't know anything about Arlington National Cemetery, it's not the country's largest national cemetery. That's actually in Riverside, California, but Arlington is considered to be the country's most sacred burial ground, with more than 400,000 headstones across 630 acres. It is incredibly moving to stand in. It's where President John F. Kennedy is buried. His grave is actually marked by an eternal flame. It's also where some 400 Medal of Honor recipients are buried, spanning all American wars, including going back to the Civil War. And most famously, it's where the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier is. It's where we honor those men and women who were killed in war but never came home or couldn't be identified when they did. And the tomb is also where the U.S. military holds ceremonies for fallen service members, and that's where Trump was for the wreath-laying. After that ceremony, Trump was invited by the family to visit the grave in a part of Arlington known as Section 60, which is largely the part where most of the dead from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are. And that'll be important here in just a second. But his campaign brought cameras so that he could do a photo op with the family at the gravesite and over the headstone, which is against the law. Section 60 and many portions of actual Arlington National Cemetery aren't filled with tourists that are looking for JFK. It's for families of loved ones, and especially Section 60, we're not talking about long-distant relatives. These are mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and husbands and wives and children who visit these. So it's a much, much more solemn part of an already very solemn national cemetery. And those sections, including Section 60, are really meant for the public in the same way, like the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and, like I said, JFK's burial spot. It's just not what it's for, and these areas are really meant for families to mourn and reflect in peace. The news was broken by NPR on Tuesday, and I didn't get a chance to cover it earlier this week, but the fallout from what Trump did at this gravesite has been extensive. That Trump's team, and it was a team, he's a former president, he travels with an entourage. They were met by an employee of Arlington National Cemetery as they were trying to set up for a photo shoot. And it's not like Trump asked someone to hold his phone and take the picture. The intent here was at the very least to make a social media post about the visit, if not an actual ad, because Trump has blamed the Biden administration for the botched exit of Afghanistan, and he's then turned that on Harris. Now, the exit did happen under Biden, and several families of those killed, including the one that invited Trump, believe Biden is responsible for the death of their loved ones. Many military experts, including former generals and an internal report from the White House, put the blame on, or at least in part, on the Trump administration for making a pretty flawed deal with the Taliban and then setting a hard exit date for Afghanistan. And then because Trump tried to hold on to power in 2020, the incoming Biden administration was locked out of briefings that an incoming administration would normally have been in to make a smooth transition and understand what's going on when we are talking about the lives of American service members and civilians who have worked with the U.S. Army and the U.S. government for the better part of 2 decades. Now, that being said, other former generals who were there at the time and Joint Chief of Staff General Mark Kelly, said the Biden administration moved too slowly, specifically its State Department, at notifying the people who needed to know there was going to be a U.S. exit, and that created a very chaotic exit that eventually led to this awful attack. Now, all of that is important as a backdrop here, but the Trump team and Trump himself get to Section 60, and the cemetery employee tries to stop them. And according to the U.S. Army, that employee tells Trump and his team they cannot take photos for political purposes, citing federal law, DoD policies, and Army regulations, and they pushed her out of the way and proceeded to do the photo shoot anyway. When that news broke, a Trump campaign spokesperson said this, quote, "The fact is that a private photographer was permitted on the premises and for whatever reason an unnamed individual clearly suffering from a mental health episode decided to physically block members of President Trump's team during a very solemn ceremony." So, first, according to the U.S. Army, there is no way that a private photographer would have been allowed to be in Section 60 for political photo ops. Yes, they would have been allowed at the tomb of the unknown soldier, but not at the specific gravesite. Second, the reporting, the Army statement, and the statement from the Trump spokesperson suggests that an employee was assaulted by someone in the Trump campaign, and then the Trump campaign went out of its way to personally attack this employee by saying she was suffering from an episode. The Army did a quick investigation and said that this incident was unfortunate. The employee and her professionalism had unfairly been attacked. They went on to say that Arlington staff will continue to ensure public ceremonies are conducted with the dignity and respect the nation's fallen deserve, which, for the U.S. Army, talking about the conduct of a former U.S. president, is scathing. In the end, that employee decided not to press charges, reportedly because she was afraid of retaliation from either Trump, his campaign, or his supporters. And also, the Army says because of that, they consider this matter over. Except it wasn't over, because the Trump campaign put this video out about the visit.
We lost 13 great people. What a horrible day it was. We didn't lose one person in 18 months. And then they took over that disaster, the leaving of Afghanistan.
If you're just listening to this video, it shows Trump laying the wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier and at the gravesite taking pictures with the family in which he is smiling and giving a thumbs up multiple times over the headstone. You could hear him disparage Biden, which would be political activity and banned from Arlington. And when that was posted, the Trump campaign manager, Chris LaCivita, who is a Purple Heart awarded Marine veteran, said, "I hope this triggers the Secretary of the Army trying to, I guess, stick it to the U.S. Army for defending an employee who wanted to maintain the respect for the dead." LaCivita has a history of this. He was the architect behind the Swift Boat campaign, which was a lie about John Kerry's Vietnam service that contributed to his failed presidential bid, and the Trump campaign has continued to go after Tim Walz. Also, when that video was posted of Trump in Section 60, the family of an adjacent service member buried there who actually died by suicide came out and said they were not told that this was going to happen, and they were hurt to see their loved one's gravesite and headstone used in this way. Now, in the days since that, the Trump campaign has continued to try and use the incident to talk about Biden and Harris and the exit of Afghanistan, but then Trump suggested the camera used to make the video was a plant by Democrats, which isn't true, and then his campaign promised to release the footage of the incident with the employee, which, as I'm recording this, has not happened yet. And then, as I was recording this, Trump put up a new post on Truth Social, which is his social media platform. He both thanks and blames the family that invited them to Section 60, saying, "Thank you for saying you wanted me to stand with you at Arlington National Cemetery and take pictures. That was your request, not mine, but it was my great honor to do so." There's more to that post, but that was the important part there. All of this comes on the heels of just a few weeks ago, Trump repeatedly saying that the Medal of Freedom is equal to or much better than the Medal of Honor, because the people who are given the Medal of Honor come back terribly wounded or don't come back at all. That's not always the case. In fact, the majority of Medal of Honor winners come back alive. Yes, some of them are wounded, but that's not a criteria for being given the Medal of Honor. Now, the Medal of Freedom is the country's highest civilian honor. It's the closest thing we have to a knighthood. It does not require acts of extreme valor or heroism or sacrifice. Those statements from Trump led him to be admonished by the National Veterans of Foreign Wars organization. The Arlington incident also brought back up other times Trump ran afoul of veterans and the military. There was the time in 2018 when he called World War I Marines buried in France suckers and losers, and lied about the rain stopping him from being able to take a helicopter, and that the Secret Service refused to drive him to that cemetery in France. Now, Trump has disputed the claims that he called fallen soldiers suckers and losers, but there are many corroborating reports from people around him, including his former chief of staff, that said he did say that. In 2020, he insulted Gold Star families, blaming them for giving him COVID, and then acted like he would have preferred not to have met them in the meeting room in the event that he met them in. And then all the way back in 2015, when he insulted the now late John McCain for being a prisoner of war in Vietnam, saying he prefers people who weren't captured. Right now, it's unclear if this most recent incident at Arlington will mean anything at all. Trump won the military vote in 2020, but his numbers with service members, veterans, and their families have been slipping. He only brought in 52% of the veteran vote in 2020 after getting more than 60% of it in 2016. On the other side of the aisle here, Kamala Harris said she believes veterans and their families should be treated with nothing less than the highest respect and gratitude, adding, "It is my belief that someone who cannot meet this simple, sacred duty should never again stand behind the seal of the President of the United States of America." Veterans who support Trump, including several members of families of the 13 killed in the Afghan exit, have criticized Harris. They called this grandstanding, and Senator Tom Cotton, who was a Bronze Star for service in the Army, said Trump didn't break any laws at the National Cemetery, although Cotton does have his own issues with his own service record. He was caught lying about being an Army Ranger. He said he was. He wasn't. Now listen, all of this has gotten really, really ugly, and this won't be the end of it. But I think it's worth pointing out that it could have been over if Trump or his campaign had apologized instead of doubling, tripling, and now quadrupling down as of today. They made a choice to go after the employee, the Army, and now Harris, and that shouldn't be overlooked in this incident that was entirely of their own making. Okay, that is it for today's MIMS Mini. Please rate and review the show, then head over to YouTube and like and subscribe there. I've got some exciting new changes coming to the channel very soon, so you won't want to miss out. Speaking of missing out, don't miss out on the latest Substack articles. I've got new ones going up all the time. You can subscribe at the link in the description below. And finally, please share Make It Make Sense on social media. It's MIMS News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod. It'll really help this thing gain some traction, and it kind of already has, thanks to your help. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.